Hello, everyone. Oh, that was almost a smooth intro that's like professionally done, and that looks good. It's good. Last week was a little bit crazy. It was it was fun. We have fun here. Welcome to the Cameron Journal News Hour. My name is Cameron Cowan. I'm the fellow in the picture. We have a packed day and week of headlines. Hello, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. I always appreciate when people stop by. Um, Sometimes a lot of people watch this after it's taped and I upload it. A lot of people watch afterwards and don't come during the live. But I've been getting encouraging people to come during the live, comment, all this type of thing. That's how we grow. So I've been very very concerned about Cameron Journal growth. The website's doing very well. We've had a bumper year of traffic. We've done so well, but we're still working on videos and lives. So if you haven't already liked, subscribed, turn on notifications, please do so. There's an interview every week. There is this news hour. The interview this week actually is, I think it's really good. The interview this week is, I'm going to go look to make sure I have the right thing. Yes, it is. Mickey Janae. She is a young 20-year-old graphic novel. No, not graphic novel, regular novel. YA author. That's a young adult author. She's written a new book. It's really great. So if you haven't gone to check out her her interview, you should on YouTube if you're not watching on YouTube because a lot of people watch on Facebook. So if you haven't gone, you should go check that out because she's super interesting and so young. I'm always amazed. I was not writing anything worth reading at 20, and her and I have a great joke about that. I was not writing anything worth reading at 20, so it was super cool to be able to talk to her and just get the next generation of writers coming along. So it was really good. Very good interview this week. So I'm going to get busy with the news and not monologue too much because we have a ton of headlines and I have a podcast recording at 8 o'clock that I have to tape. So I literally have to be out of here by like 10 minutes still. So we have 15 minutes to do the news, which is plenty of time. Obviously we have some big headlines this week. None the least of which is the whole drone UFO thing. We're going to get into it. Biden's pardons. We're going to get into that. I had another conversation about AI today. A lot of news in AI today. I read a newsletter this morning about AI and how it was going to disrupt content creators because the tools to make content were going to get democratized and soon everyone would be doing it. I've kind of heard that before. The reality is almost all the content on the internet is uploaded by like 1% of internet users. So I don't know if these new tools are going to move that a whole lot, but it will be definitely interesting to see how that develops. But I had Benjamin Bressington on, and um he has this new financial tools product, and he is doing tax debts and tax rebates and refunds and the tax code and all that type of thing. And I think that's a great actually use case for AI because the tax code is so labyrinthine. But we kind of got into the greater conversation about AI, and I'm kind of like, okay, what are you going to do with all the people? How are they going to have jobs? How are they going to buy anything? And like all the AI people have no answer. They don't think that far ahead. He's like, yeah, get rid of, universities and get rid of, all this because the knowledge is here. I'm like, knowing how to prompt an AI to tell you stuff is not the same stuff as actual knowing stuff. And he's like, oh yeah, there's no actual learning. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So that's also on topic this week. So let's just dive right in. There we go. And we're going to start with not the back end of my YouTube channel. We're going to start over here. Not with Bitcoin, health and yeah. Let's start with health insurance. That's a good enough place to start. We also have my kind of bookmarks of the week, including the infamous drone manufacturer video. We'll get to that in a minute. But let's talk about health insurance first because obviously this past week we've still been talking about Luigi Mangione and the United Whole Healthcare thing, and I saved this from the Times this morning because they had this poll, and it said ask Americans how they rate their health insurance, and the numbers here are interesting. So if they're in excellent or good health, they rank their insurance company as excellent, good, fair, and poor. But if you look down here in Americans of fair or poor health, you have some interesting expansion. Fair almost doubles. Poor does more than double. Good has a slight reduction by 5 points. And excellent drops by 9, which I actually more than 9, 10. And so I thought it was interesting how, if you're not using health insurance, you have a better opinion. If you are actually having to use your health insurance, your opinion goes down precipitously. And it was also interesting because at the top it mentioned that Americans voted last month in an election that polls showed was largely about the economy. Less than 1% of likely voters ranked healthcare as their top issue. And the only reason I bring this up is it seems like, based upon what's been happening online with United Healthcare CEO shooting and all the horror stories and all this type of thing, one could get the impression that Americans really don't like health insurance companies. And I think that to some greater lesser degree is kind of true. I mean, let's face it, even among excellent or good health, we have a nice cadre of fair and poor, and for fair and poor health, we've got a nice, we've got a nice group here. But it's not the panacea that I think people think it is. And the other kind of reason I wanted to bring this up is longtime listeners will know I'm a big fan of Medicare for All. I'm a big fan of some sort of universal, system for citizens to be able to go and get health care, possibly with some sort of, stepped up income based cost scheme. In fact, in the archives of the Cameron Journal, you'll find an article called My Plan for Medicare for All, where I talk about taking different aspects of state Medicaid programs and kind of mushing that together into a national system. And one of the things that happens out at the state level is you end up with a small sort of fee-based structure. That was true when I was on Medicaid in Colorado in my 20s, because I was in between business and jobs, and I have some health conditions, can't really be without insurance. So, and so I've kind of experienced different systems around the country, and also different private insurance and different employer insurance. I've had a lot of different experiences in this area, and so I kind of mushed all that together into something that I thought could work and not necessarily break the bank. And I think one of the things about Medicare for All that I think a lot of people forget is that the vast majority of Americans have access to health insurance. And from what we can tell, most of them like the coverage that they have. And so it's very difficult, I think, given these conditions, to get people excited about a big change like Medicare for All, because I think as far as most people are concerned, this isn't really a problem that needs address. And I think that's something I've been maintaining since the Obamacare years. And I very foolishly said, oh, well, Obamacare is not going to work, and it will leave a bunch of gaps, and that will force them to do Medicare for All. And I was wrong. I thought, oh yeah, give Obamacare 5 years and we'll have to do Medicare for All because this Obamacare system won't work. It's built to fail. And I was wrong. They spent time trying to repeal it and all this sort of thing. And so now we're in the situation where the vast majority of people have health insurance, usually through their employer. And as we can tell, they're really okay with it. So I think a lot of the quote-unquote cultural moment we're having about healthcare really is a phenomena of a cadre of people online and doesn't have any actual reflection on the broader population's opinion of healthcare and health insurance and all this type of thing. It does say here, though, a partisan split does emerge, however, when Americans are asked if they would prefer a government-run healthcare system or one based mostly on private insurers. 71% of Democrats preferred government-run system, compared with just 21% of Republicans. Overall, the nation is split on which system they prefer, with 49% of Americans saying they favor private insurance and 46% saying they would prefer a government-run system. However, support for government-run health insurance has been growing in recent years as support for private insurance has waned, and with the margin of error, the support for either system is essentially tied. And that, honestly, from coming out of the Obamacare debate of many years ago, is quite impressive. Bernie Sanders has gotten some nice penetration on that issue, and like everything else, we're very evenly split. Now, we're going to get rid of that. We're not going to talk about this Bitcoin thing right now. We're going to jump over here to a big thing that happened today, and that was a teenage shooter went to a Christian school and shot 2 people in Madison, Wisconsin, and 6 others were injured. They killed another teenage student and a teacher, and then also killed themselves at the Abundant Life Christian School in Madison, Wisconsin. There's not much to say. We don't have a ton of updates right now. The latest here was from 5 minutes ago, and it says Chief Barnes and Madison Police have said in a news conference that investigators were not yet sure if the victims has been specifically targeted by the shooter who killed a teacher and another teenage student. Whether they were targeted or not would speak to motivation, but we don't know that answer just yet. And they're talking about the shooting. They're getting into the details, but we don't have much more on that right now, and there's going to be no new information coming out for the rest of the day. And obviously some stories and things are coming out, and all. So this will be in the dialogue. We'll probably talk more about it. It'll get talked about more in the course of the week. So did want to go grab that headline real quick. While we're here, let me also talk about the Biden sentencing thing. So it's yeah. So last week Biden made headlines, which he rarely does these days, by commuting the sentences of 1,500 Americans who are all non-violent federal offenders, most of which have been placed in home confinement during the pandemic. And that included a lot of people, including the lady in Kentucky who stole from her local municipality to fund her horse habit, the guy who was taking financial favors for sending kids to prison, and a whole bunch of people. And that catches him almost up to Obama, nowhere near as much as Trump in terms of pardons and commutations and all this sort of thing. And a lot of this was kind of seen as a, kind of last chance to do it before Trump gets in and, and no, and no more, and you can't do anything anymore. So there's also, it was interesting how, people want, prison abolition, and they want less, people in the system, and then when something happens, they don't like it because, well, they committed this crime. Yeah, that's the point. Yes, they committed a crime. They've served some time, however long or short that might be, and yes, if the executive thinks you're worthy, you can, end up not having to serve the whole term. A lot of the people in this were old. They're not going to reoffend. They're not in that position anymore. They're probably generally good people. But the online dialogue about this was hilarious, and it was entertaining. I found it entertaining. Do I think it's a good idea? I mean, if they were good enough for home confinement, I don't care as much. It is what it is. In entertaining news, I've been looking for this bit of footage all weekend.
Welcome to the first day of rehearsal.
And so, there's a show called Anne Juliet on Broadway, and Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson decided to go to go and have her Broadway premiere.
I'm so excited to be here.
I have been, like I said, I've been trying to find this all weekend. I think it's incredibly entertaining. Apparently, I did not know this, but it came out that it was always her dream to be on Broadway, and she went into the law instead. But now, one of the privileges of being one of the most important people in America is you get to do little fun things like this, you know. Would never get the job otherwise, but thanks to being a Supreme Court justice, you too can have a one-night walk-on role in a Broadway show and get to be on Broadway. So I thought this was really interesting and fascinating, and it was a lot of fun.
What I like about it is that I am having a very strongly negative reaction to it.
Yeah. So it was interesting. It was fascinating. As someone who enjoys musical theater, I thought it was interesting. So, but yeah, this video was surprisingly hard to find. I wanted to find some sort of video with it, and I just could not find it. So that's fun news. We need sometimes a break from all the serious stuff that we end up talking about. Oh, this is an anecdote too, bouncing off Justice Jackson and her Broadway thing. So, when I saw this tweet, I laughed out loud. I did. I died of laughter. Our new administration, pictured here, they were at I think it was a football game. And they're all watching on, and J.D. Vance was cited drinking beer. He's the only one of those three that drinks. Trump famously doesn't drink because his brother was an alcoholic. Musk doesn't drink. J.D. Vance had a beer. Having the Palantir logo up there is interesting. Oh no, was this the Army-Navy game? It was the Army-Navy game, yeah. Which is the only football my dad watches. Is interesting because J.D. Vance owes his entire political career to Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel has financed this man, paid for this man, given him make-work jobs, this whole sort of thing. And the fact that we have Peter Thiel's, hand-picked, backed, paid-for politician who's now going to be Vice President of the United States, and his logo up there is just kind of... It kind of belies the greater mission of Peter Thiel is from South Africa and can't get political power himself, and he has hired this poor fellow here to take advantage of this poor fellow over here so that he can get political power, and Musk is along for the ride because Musk and Thiel are aligned. And it's, it was it was a quite interesting sort of thing. Palantir is a big government contractor. I actually invested in Palantir for a while. The returns were terrible, and I gave it up. Because a lot of people said, "Oh, this is the future. This could be a great ride." And I probably sat on that stock for probably 5 years. The returns were negligible. I sold it off. I think I lost money on that trade actually. It was kind of an entertaining thing to be kind of like, yeah, there's a lot being said in this photo. Lot being said. And I won't even get into facial expressions and body language and all that stuff. Or the fact that Musk is, standing... I mean, truly Musk is in the power behind the throne position in this photo, which is probably the most entertaining part next to the Palantir logo. Below the USAA credit union. Him kind of being, literally the power behind the throne. And by the way, if you want to know what $235 million will buy you, it will buy you these two in the White House and a lovely Jumbotron appearance at an Army-Navy football game. That's, for $235 million, you could be up here. So there you go. Let's see. What do we have next? Oh, yes. This is an AI thread. Yes. Okay. Let's save AI for a minute. Europe, we're going to talk to. Germany, we're going to talk about. Let's get into the drone thing right now. Because people don't watch more than 20 minutes. So let's keep them around for 5 more minutes. So, as some of you might know, let me set this up. As some of you might know, there have been sightings here on the East Coast of drones, planes, lights in the sky off the coast of New York, New Jersey, all this side of thing, mostly over the ocean, somewhat over land. There's been videos online, all this type of thing. People have been wondering what they're about. National attention got brought to this because this senator from New Jersey, I think it was, talked about it in a hearing and was demanding answers and all this sort of thing, and that's all fine and well. But he's trying to say it's some foreign adversary, and it definitely is not, because there's only 2 countries with blue water navies who can do that. The Pentagon has already said it's not a foreign adversary, and so that probably means it's some of our stuff. And when I was thinking about that, what's interesting is that then this video started really popping around where this guy tries to explain what it is. He doesn't do so very efficiently, so we'll skip ahead to the good part, but here we go.
As a professional, as a subject matter expert. So I spoke to a gentleman a few months ago who was trying to raise an alarm to the highest levels of our government, which they had their ears closed, about this one particular nuclear warhead that he physically put his hands on. He physically touched this warhead that was left over from Ukraine. And he knew that that thing was headed towards the United States. Okay? That is a very serious deal. And everyone knows that the United States government, this administration, is pushing to get into a war with Russia. We all know that. We all feel it. We all see it. Okay? Well, back up a few years. Do y'all remember when those drones were mysteriously flying across the Interstate 70 corridor from Colorado up into Nebraska, down here into Kansas, and out into Missouri?
Skipping ahead because he's inefficient.
From what we understand, they were out there trying to find this radioactive material.
That's the crux of the whole video. He goes on for 9 and 2, but that's the whole crux of the video, is that he thinks the drones are looking for lost nuclear material. Now, people are like, dirty bombs are so easy to, make, and one could go anywhere and all this sort of thing. That's actually not true. Dirty bombs are actually really hard to make, and I'll tell you why. You need 2 things. You need, 1, a pretty good volume of fissionable material, because you're not actually using its fissionable abilities, you're only using its radiation abilities. So you need a fairly good amount of it. Then, the other problem is you then also need a lot of explosive, and you've got to pack that tightly. You've also got to get it to a place where it's going to do the most impact. Now, here's what most people don't know. We have satellites that look for radiation signatures. And, given that there are only so many places where, especially if you look for certain isotopes, uranium-235, uranium-238, cesium-137, all this sort of thing, if you go looking for those particular things, there's only a few places those are. Nuclear power plants, weapons silos, and then once you eliminate all those, if one pops up where it's not supposed to be, then you have a problem. That's how they do that. It is no easy thing to find that. Now, my guess is if they're looking for something, whatever they're looking for isn't easily found by satellite. They need something smaller, faster, like a drone. I think what's kind of interesting is that there's all this sort of it's UFOs, it's some sort of conspiracy. And I think this is a situation where the lack of information is the worst part. We kind of saw this in 2023 with the whole balloon thing. You had that Chinese balloon flew diagonally across the country, and then they shot it down with like an F-16 or something, and when it was like over the Atlantic, and kind of the lack of information about that was interesting sort of thing. But anyway, this guy seems to think that they're looking for fissionable material. Other people have said this guy is full of it. I don't know what the truth is right now. There's been no official information. But if you're thinking about the drone thing, this is certainly a possibility. I mean, there's something that's just mass hysteria, and I think there's probably something to that. But I think it would be good to know why these objects are flying. Now, I think some of the pictures I've seen, some of the videos I've seen, it does look like quadricopter drones flying by at a low altitude. That just could be somebody. Any old body. I've also seen pictures of people talking about that, and it's just an airplane. One was so blatant, it literally says American Airlines on the side. Like, it's an airplane, you know. You know, big, round wings, engines that go round and round. You've seen them. They frequently are found at airports. This sort of thing. I think there is a mass hysteria aspect to it, but I do think it is definitely worth investigating to find out what the story is. And if it is just a private person, then find out why they're doing this. You know, and maybe, ironically enough, this is an area for some regulation. Let's see. Is there... Oh, this is the quote from last week I couldn't get a hold of because Financial Times is paywalled. This quote from Mitch McConnell I thought was very interesting. "We are in a very, very dangerous world right now, reminiscent of before World War II," he says. "Even the slogan is the same, America first. That's what they said in the 1930s. I've been saying it. I've been saying it. I've been saying it. I hate to agree with Mitch McConnell, Senator Tortoise from Kentucky. But yeah, that is the moment we're living in. I've been comparing this to the 1920s a lot, and I wish more, you know, when people start to say, you know, America first, and when you think of America first, they don't understand there's a very kind of dangerous attitude of isolationism that comes along with that. Things end up getting very racist, very uncomfortable. And unfortunately, when we step back from the world, chaos can ensue. And one of the things we've tried to do since World War II is keep a lid, to some degree, on a lot of the chaos in the world that can adversely affect our citizens, our economy, all this type of thing. And it's getting harder. You know, it's getting a lot harder. Countries are emboldened, and the sort of the management of the geopolitical environment is getting a lot more difficult than it used to be. And I think trying to step back and make it all about us and not understanding our place in the world and the planet does put us in a very dangerous place. So unfortunately, I agree with Mitch McConnell. It's a weird thing. That's not important. That's predictions for 2028. This one is good. We should talk about this for a second. U.S. manufacturing construction spending. People will say nobody is, you know, manufacturing's not coming back. We haven't spent money on jobs, all this type of thing. If you look at computer, electronics, electrical construction spending, huge. Chemicals, food, beverage, all, like, people talk about, oh, the jobs aren't coming back. Well, they are, and it's in technology, it's in computers, electronics, and electrical, it's a little bit in chemicals, all this sort of thing. Fabricated metals even having a little bit of a moment. All of these things are, you know, growing, and it's kind of interesting because the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act are two of probably the biggest pieces of industrial legislation that have passed in American history, and nobody really knows about them. Kamala Harris never mentioned them during the campaign. And what's, I think, the funniest part is most of the growth of these things is happening in red states, in red districts, to give people in red areas jobs. Most of this growth isn't going to happen in blue states. And it's quite an interesting thing. And the response tweet is also really notable. Trump's name will be on every ribbon cutting from these because Dem factions thought that environmental red tape was more important than permitting reform to finish projects in less than 4 years, so Biden could get the credit. Totally true. Totally true. And this is the stuff, when I say that the way we talk about politics is broken, and the things that we talk about with politics is broken, this is the shit that I'm talking about, is where we don't talk about the things that are actually helping people. If you had started a narrative that, yeah, you want working class jobs and you want jobs for people, Democrats are delivering, and then post this chart. You want to talking about those things in actual ways, because when you don't talk about those things, nature abhors a vacuum. It then gets filled with misinformation, disinformation, all sorts of terrible things. This is here. It's today. It's happening today. And the fact that the Democrats continue to never talk about stuff is just gut-wrenching. And that's when people are kind of like, I think they want to lose. And when you look at some of the things they do, it's hard to counteract that. What the problem is, the consultants never believe that having this conversation is ever going to move the needle. They believe it's everything else. And this stuff, talking about, hey, the jobs are coming back. We are, excelling in industries where we can run ahead of China and elsewhere. This is the conversation worth having. Now, this one was just proving that they wanted to roll back the New Deal, which is the Trump administration's thing. I've said that. It's a well-known thing. This video is actually kind of funny because he talks about how we're living under FDR's personal monarchy. They want to get rid of Social Security. They want to get rid of Medicare. They want to get rid of Medicaid. They want to get rid of the FDIC that insures your deposits at banks. So we can go back to the days when the bank fails, you go broke. And the funny thing is, Mark Andreessen literally comes out and says that in this video. Yeah, I should retweet this actually because it's important. So, enough of my bookmarks. Let us move on to Bitcoin, and we'll also get into AI. Yeah, Europe. Oh, the post office. Before we go to Bitcoin, let's talk about the post office. So, Donald Trump, in his long-standing war against the post office, which brought us Louis DeJoy in his first term, who Biden was never able to get rid of, now is talked about privatizing the U.S. Postal Service because it's losing billions of dollars. It says here, according to the New York Post, he's discussed the issue with Howard Lutnick, his pick for Commerce Secretary, at his Mar-a-Lago residence in Palm Beach, Florida. After learning of the agency's annual financial losses, Trump said the government should not be responsible for subsidizing the Postal Service. The Postal Service lost an astounding $9.5 billion during the fiscal year ending September 30th, up from a loss of $6.5 billion the previous year, it reported in November. The agency, which had a total operating revenue of nearly $80 billion, blamed its financial bleeding on non-cash contributions to worker compensations. Privatizing the federal agency could send shockwaves across the shipping industry, affecting small businesses and rural communities, in addition to potentially getting hundreds of thousands of federal jobs, the Washington Post reported. It could also have drastic effects on the e-commerce industry, with companies like Amazon relying on the Postal Service for last-mile delivery between their fulfillment centers and customers' homes or businesses. Trump has long had a fraught relationship with the Postal Service. In his first administration, during the early days of the pandemic, he called the agency a joke and said he wouldn't provide any stimulus loans unless it quadrupled its package prices. A Postal Service spokesman told the Washington Post that under its modernization plan, it has cut 45 million work hours over the past 3 years and slashed transportation costs by $2 billion. Trump's transition team did not respond to requests for comment. I'm not surprised. He tried to gut it the first time. This is just him finishing the job. Now, again, no surprise on Trump and the Postal Service. Anyway, yeah. So I've been covering Bitcoin and crypto a couple weeks now. I got this morning too. It was a very busy day. And this is significant. So let me sort of, set this up. So MicroStrategy is a software company / hedge fund investment vehicle that is bringing Bitcoin due to its relationship with crypto and how much kind of Bitcoin it has on its balance sheet. MicroStrategy, the company, is joining the largest NASDAQ ETF, which is QQQ. It's called the NASDAQ 100. And it is a popular, kind of set and forget investment because it has the 100 best companies of the NASDAQ and it has shares in all of them. So when the NASDAQ 100 goes up, so do you. And this was interesting. This quote right here. Very few people realize that this moment is Bitcoin entering the NASDAQ in the MSTR, that's MicroStrategy, wrapper, similar to Bitcoin entering the spot ETF market through a BlackRock wrapper in January. So, Bitcoin isn't being traded on the NASDAQ, but a company who's heavily invested in Bitcoin is. And like I said, it's had pretty tremendous gains this year. It had a 500% gain sort of thing, especially between September and now. It's pulled back a little bit as it is joined into the NASDAQ 100. Its market cap has exploded. They started in 2000 and they had sort of a middling run. And then the last, 5 years, they've really, jumped up and their market cap has increased tenfold. Which, to me screams Ponzi scheme. Critics have said that. And it is this whole, company is really staked its whole strategy and its whole financial saliency on Bitcoin. And so it's quite a move. It's quite an interesting sort of business strategy, and for something like Bitcoin, which itself is a Ponzi scheme, to be getting the NASDAQ, this tells me something very important. And the fact that it's going out in a newsletter like this, which is Open Bell Daily, this tells me one thing and one thing only. Bitcoin is here and it's here to stay. The problem is there's no underlying value. There's no underlying value. The whole thing is predicated that someone else will pay more. Or not. And so I'm kind of, and last week we talked about how Bitcoin was going to be the new gold, and, we've had this whole narrative, and I think the narrative right now is, Bitcoin is here, it's here to stay, it's going up in value, get on the train now, sort of thing. And I tell people in open disclosure, I was an early adopter of Bitcoin. I bought it at $60. I sold it at $600. Thought I had done very well, because I realized, there's not actually anything here. There's no value. There's nothing. You're not buying and selling anything. It's just it's numbers in a server. It's calculations. It's work that someone has performed, in a computer, sort of thing. And there's nothing to it. It doesn't even actually exist. Shut off the computers and there goes Bitcoin. At least with gold, you still have metal, sort of thing. So it's, I feel like this is not going to be great for financial markets. I don't have any data for that other than history of like tulips and other bubbles and all this type of thing. But stocks go to companies. Bond goes to debt. Bitcoin is nothing. There is nothing behind it. No actual economic activity occurs. Nothing is bought or sold. No one is helped. It's just a thing. It's a kind of it's a financial toy, but not so much because now it's in the NASDAQ 100 with it thanks to this company. So it's interesting to just kind of see how this will go and develop. While we're on the subject of technology and Bitcoin and everything else, there was this really fascinating thread from William Kuo, where he talks about the U.S. isn't losing to China, it's handing China the win. From 5G to EVs to AI, China builds for the future while America worships short-term profits and Wall Street greed. The invisible hand can't compete with strategic planning. And then he kind of goes into the different ways in which China's centrally planned economy allows it to move faster than the U.S. And he's not wrong about short-term profits and all this sort of thing. It says China thinks collectively. Massive state capital investments in semiconductors, AI, and green tech. The U.S. worships Wall Street short-term profits, gutting its future for quarterly returns. He's entirely correct. I don't necessarily think 5G base stations are that important. And he is, right about the huge investments in infrastructure. And, the EV revolution, I'm not sold on that's going to be as big of a revolution as people think it is. Could we be building more chargers? Absolutely. Did Biden's attempt at funding national charging stations happen? No. They built 2 chargers. It was kind of a huge waste of money. It's and his points about infrastructure are 110% true. The education system is good, but this is the important part. Adam Smith's invisible hand. China's playing a different game. They don't wait for markets, they build them, force them, and dominate them. Meanwhile, America lets billionaires gut the system. True. The US had decades to bleed in semiconductors, AI, energy, and education. Instead, it chose deregulation, short-term profits, and oligarchs. China's long-term ambition is eating America's lunch. The iceberg is visible, and it's called China. The US elite kept steering the ship into it, blinded by greed and hubris. Adam Smith doesn't stand a chance against a nation that plans for tomorrow. And this reply here also made me cackle. The U.S. financialized economy is a cannibalistic downward spiral of rent extraction and can't compete with systems that invest in industries and infrastructure, despite its built-up assets. This means that they will lean harder on empire and war to keep the system afloat. I'm not entirely sold on China being so dominant. I'm not. However, a lot of the points he's making about our lack of investment in the future is 110% true. Part of the reason why America won the Cold War and why we became so dominant, especially coming out into the 60s, 70s, and 80s, massive investments by the Eisenhower administration. They spent money on schools and universities, the space program. It was everywhere. High taxes in the 50s, 95% top-end tax rate. They spent lavishly on things that would improve America for tomorrow. The interstate system, new airports, rural electrification. And even before that, we had, the TVA in the 1930s. Coming out of, in the Depression, a lot of those were jobs programs, but the creation of the TVA allowed us to make the atomic bomb. Eisenhower kind of took that and just 10x'd it with new schools, new universities, investments in science, technology, especially once the Soviets launched Sputnik. There was this whole, oh my god, America is behind panic, and we spent fabulously trying to catch up and building stuff for tomorrow. Honestly, the reality is most of the technology we use today is because of those investments back then. And people don't necessarily really realize that, but you would have not had the computer revolution, personal computers, operating systems, semiconductors, all that stuff, if we hadn't spent metric tons of money developing the people to make the companies to build all that. And it takes long-term view. Eisenhower invested in things he knew wouldn't be done before he left office. Not at all. And that is definitely, and to Mr. Wo's point, we don't invest like that anymore in this country. We don't. And China is. Now, China has a terrible debt problem. Their economy is collapsing. They are ran by one singular man who doesn't even listen to bad advice, or good advice, or bad news. Xi Jinping. But when it comes to a lot of these advancements, it is definitely easy to do. I think it's also easier to build when you can completely ignore your population and you don't have to be accountable to them in literally any way. You can set up 5G stations when no one's going to complain about them. You can plow through new railroads when nobody can stop them being built. We don't have that in this country, which I think is a good thing, but that's also an aspect where China is at the advantage. Now, before we close out and before I go do this podcast recording, two things. One, this room today, overnight, Olaf Scholz lost a confidence vote in the German Bundestag, and the German government has collapsed. Now this follows the collapse of the French government last week. So it says here, the German government collapsed on Monday as Chancellor Olaf Scholz lost a confidence vote in Parliament, deepening a crisis of leadership across Europe at a time of mounting economic and security challenges. The war in Ukraine has escalated, with Russia issuing increasing dire threats against Kyiv and its supporters. President-elect Donald J. Trump is set to take office in the United States, raising new questions over Europeans' trade relations and military defense. The government of France, Germany's partner in leading Europe, fell earlier this month. And now Europe's largest economy will be in the hands of a caretaker government ahead of elections early next year. On Monday, German lawmakers voted to dissolve the existing government by a vote of 394 to 207, with 116 abstaining. Coming just 9 months before parliamentary elections had been scheduled to happen, the vote was an extraordinary moment for Germany. The elections, now expected on February 23rd, will only be the fourth snap election in 75 years since the modern state was founded. The moment reflects a new era of more fractious and unstable politics in a country long known for durable coalitions built on plotting consensus. So this goes along with this, talking about what's wrong with Europe. So there's a video I watched from Bloomberg that I'm going to post in the Cameron Journal here shortly, talking about the kind of where Europe went wrong. And so if you see here on this chart, in the early 2000s, Europe and the United States tracked pretty well. Then we have the Great Financial Crisis. We have a dip, Europe goes down a lot, you have crisis, Eurozone debt crisis sort of thing, and we shoot up coming out of the Great Financial Crisis. And then productivity just increases and increases. Europe, on the other hand, they come back up, but we surpass them almost immediately. And it has just gotten ever wider, and now they're actually going down while we're increasing. And some people will say, well, life in Europe is better. They're more about for people, not companies. One of the things I've talked about with my European partners is, the lack of startups, the lack of big companies, why nobody wants to create, huge companies in Europe. There's a lot of talk about regulations and all this type of thing. This person kind of goes along and says, yeah, it's enjoying a pleasant life and not living in a terrible country like the USA. Noah Smith, who's blocked me on Twitter because of a fight we had a couple years ago, is kind of wondering what's wrong with Europe and why the United States is growing so fast. And the reality is, life for the everyday average person in Europe can be pretty good. You have healthcare and paid leave and stable jobs and subsidized food where prices are stable, and you have all these regulations that sort of keep the worst impulses away. But as we can tell, when it comes to productivity, when it comes to financial growth, all this type of thing, things are quite worse. And it's even worse if you live in the UK, sort of thing. There's a lot of there's a lot of really there's a lot of terrible things about the US that Europe has put in place and said, no, we do not want to live that way. So then the question is, does the way Europe operate that makes it good for the everyday person, is that sacrifice of growth, productivity, and wealth worth the trade-off, which you can immediately go across the pond and say, okay, in the US, we let our wealthy do whatever the hell they want. We have let Silicon Valley do whatever the hell it wants. We have grown, more wealthy. Well, the rich have grown more wealthy, so much for the rest of us. Our productivity is up. Our country is wealthier. Our tax rates are higher. All this type of thing, is that worth it? Would letting go of some of the regulations and some of the things that make life in the Eurozone good, is the good life we have worth the loss in productivity and wealth? And this person says, yeah, kinda. And I wouldn't necessarily disagree, especially for the average person. But this also, with the French government falling and the German government falling, and talks about productivity and wealth and the missing $3 trillion in growth that Europe has not had since the Great Financial Crisis, all this sort of thing. There's kind of now this question of what's wrong with Europe? How do we get Europe sort of back on track, going, growing, happening, and becoming a vibrant place to do business and work again? I don't have the answer to that question, but I think the discussion is interesting from an international perspective, and we'll talk more about it as time goes on. I'm planning on tracking this story, but I just wanted to bring it up this week as something to talk about. So so that is that's the news for the week. It's a lot of news stories, a lot of stuff to get through and got through. I didn't even get to the TikTok ban, which is happening. That is probably 100% happening. TikTok lost its appeal at the 7th Circuit, and if the Supreme Court can take it and issue an injunction, but if the Supreme Court chooses not to take it, TikTok will disappear on January the 19th if they do not find an American buyer. The Chinese side of TikTok, ByteDance, has said if they sell off American TikTok, it will not come with the algorithm, which is pretty much the whole value of the platform. So, yeah. If you follow me on TikTok at Cameron Journal, please make sure to follow me on other platforms like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. I am on Blue Sky, at cameronjournal.bsky.social, all this sort of thing. So, yeah, TikTok may be going away if some things don't happen. I imagine there is some consortium of people trying to buy TikTok. They're still arguing about it in court. Obviously over a national security thing, all this sort of thing. So I didn't really get to dig into that story in depth, but that's kind of the quick and dirty of the TikTok situation. So if you have found people on TikTok that you love, make sure to go follow them on other platforms. If you love me on TikTok, because I do exclusive content for TikTok, which I guess I'll do that for YouTube now. I'll figure that out later. If you love me on TikTok, all this type of thing. If you're watching this on TikTok, which you will be when I do shorts later, make sure to follow me on other platforms. So, thank you all for coming. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you're on YouTube. If you're on other platforms, make sure to follow. You can find me everywhere online. All your links are at CameronJournal.com. And make sure to sign up for my weekly newsletter. It goes out to your inbox every Saturday. Programming note, this is the last news hour of 2024. I'll be taking the rest of the year off because I am exhausted. And there'll be one last newsletter this Saturday for everybody, which I'm going to write on Friday. So, I will see you all in 2025. I love you all. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next year. Talk soon now. Bye-bye.